I'm going to spend 20 minutes, probably 20, 25 minutes talking about cloud native. And one of the things that we see a lot in the kind of what we're doing is really trying to get companies to understand what the hell does it mean, how do you move applications to the cloud, what does that actually mean, moving applications to the cloud. And I'm just going to go through some of the areas that we see are opportunities and challenges, but also as we're in a data event, it's all about data and how one of the key areas is around migrating data to the cloud as well as applications. Hello, hello. So, as I'm sure all of you know, what's happened in the last 10 years is cloud has gone absolutely crazy. Microsoft, the big clouds, the Microsoft, the Azures, the GCPs and AWS have been growing like crazy over the last 10 years, right? But what we've seen is most companies who are legacy businesses really haven't moved their stuff to the cloud yet. Or if they have, they've done it, just shifting workloads to the cloud. So, but the digitally native companies, the guys who started their businesses in the last 10 years, if they're smart, they're not building any infrastructure. They're not hosting anything themselves. It's all in the cloud. And that's what we do. So in my ventures, one of our ventures, it's all cloud-based. We built it for the cloud in the cloud. So what I wanted to do is talk about some of the things that we see. One of the big things that we see in the market is, which I'm sure you know, is what's called lift and shift. Most companies who are, in quotes, larger companies, what they've done is taken servers and say, hey, you know what? We can reduce our costs of having our own data centers and just take our servers and put them in the cloud and we'll save a lot of money. The reality is it doesn't really save you cost by moving stuff to the cloud by just lifting and shifting. You don't get in the business value that you really could. So lifting and shifting is what's been happening, and to be honest, I see it all the time, it's still happening. Companies are saying, yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to be cloud savvy and move everything to the cloud. So as an example, if you know Capital One moved everything into the cloud. They don't have any data centers anymore, they have any servers hosted, it's all done in the cloud. But how many of these companies have actually shifted their architecture, changed their architecture and applications? Not that many. One of the other problems is that legacy companies, if you imagine SAP or name your application that's hosted internally, they're not cloud designed. They're not designed for the cloud. They're designed for the client server world. That's what they were designed for. And most of these companies have been around for a long time. Are they migrating their architecture and rebuilding it? Not really. We're not seeing that. So again, one of the challenges with large enterprise is the fact that the applications they use from third parties are not even savvy in the cloud either. So shifting stuff to the cloud is a really hard thing to do for these guys. Alongside that is the data problem. We're in a big data conference. One of the things that we're seeing is data is huge, getting bigger. I think we're underestimating the amount of data that's being generated. We're collecting a lot of data, so a lot of enterprises are collecting data, and frankly, they're running out of space and they're running out of capacity in their own data centers. They just can't build data centers fast enough to be able to host all the data they will have. So what happens is, well, what are you going to do? You have to think of re-architecting how you're going to build that. And also, a lot of the current in-house data center-driven technologies that have large storage, they're all old school. They cost a large amounts of money. I won't name names because it's unfair, but large amounts of money. You may spend $5 million on some of these things, and you have to buy hundreds of these things to make it work. And so, how the hell do you take that kind of legacy infrastructure in your own data centers and migrate it to the cloud, where data volumes are increasing, and you need to not just collect the data, but be smart how you're going to use that data to build data-driven applications. So I've said some of this. Some of these stats are important. 80% of data is in silos in the cloud. Sorry, in on-premise. They're in silos. If you go to most companies, if you say, okay, well, do you have a data layer in your business? Do you or aggregate your data? And they'll say, what are you talking about? They really don't. They really haven't figured that out. Even after 10 years. Even after 10 years of this being there, the obvious thing about layer, data is important, we should use data in our business. Most businesses really haven't figured that out. And over the last few years as well, things like data lakes came along with Cloudera, with Hadoop, and they said, hey, just store everything in Hadoop and you can solve all your data problems because you've got it in a data lake and that solves your data problem. And we've seen that fail. Companies have spent 50, 100, 200, 300 million, huge amounts of money on thinking that having a data lake will solve the problem around aggregating your data across your business. And the reality is it hasn't. So, the promise of data is still early, and obviously if you're going to implement, if you're going to scale your data elements of your business, cloud is obviously the only way to go. So, don't have to read, I'm not going to read this out, but I wanted to just emphasize what cloud native is. Because people don't know what it is, right? What is cloud native? What does that mean, right? What it really fundamentally means, and I'm an architect by background, is fundamentally redeveloping or rethinking how you build applications and deploy them running. That's what it is fundamentally. The traditional world is client server, whether it's a database and a web front end or a thick client, but it's client server, right? The new world is around scalable applications. It's around having dynamic and changeable environments, so you can change things really quickly on your application infrastructure without affecting anything else. You're using things like containers, so for any of you are technologists, you might know what containers are. I'm not going to go into containers. One of the key technologies around that is Kubernetes, which has emerged in the last few years. The reality is Kubernetes, as an example of a technology, has been around for 5 years. But the reality of companies using those kinds of technologies, we're still in the early stages of companies using that, and frankly, understanding how to use it. Because companies are really not ready in their current infrastructure to take their current applications and then migrate them. Some people what they've done is said, hey, you know what, I can have a container. What I'm going to do is going to take my app, build a container. Hey, I'm in the cloud, and I've got a container with my app on it. Look, hey, I'm really clever. But obviously, that's not what Kubernetes was designed for, not what containers are designed for. Microservices is another one, the evolution of technology around service-oriented architectures maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago, to migrating to microservices and be able to build those common components better, and I'll talk a bit about microservices later. Those are the kind of elements, again, thinking about how you redevelop your applications, moving away from monolithic applications to small little components that you build, which have different functions, which are dynamically scaled, and can be running the cloud without having to figure out how the application is going to work together. And it really gives you a whole lot of flexibility if you build it right. Add the data element to it, so if you can build technologies and you build microservices with and around data, that gives you huge amounts of flexibility, and I'll talk about some architecture things later about that. The last bit is APIs. We've seen huge growth in APIs. Some of the businesses like Stripe, like Twilio, their business is a $20, $30 billion business just on APIs. But if you go and talk to corporates, if you talk to most companies, you say APIs, they go, what the hell are they? Right? Maybe they've done stuff internally, but if you then say, okay, you know what, have you exposed your data via APIs to your customers or to your ecosystem? They go, oh no, we haven't done that. But the flexibility of building those APIs, which are links to microservices, we obviously links to containers, we're pretty early even now pretty early in the game of that. And we see that in so many companies, the kind of companies we talk to, they're not that mature on how to use APIs in their business, really, they're just not. So hopefully that makes sense. If you haven't heard of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, go and have a look at that. It's a group of large technology vendors have got together and built a foundation to help companies around all the technology you need to be a cloud native company. It's a fantastic website, it's a fantastic knowledge base, and there's a whole bunch of end users on there, like Fidelity have done a load of work. Have a look on that and you'll find loads of fantastic content. So, what's the state of play today with cloud? If we go look at it on the other side, what's the state of play? Cloud transformation, and this aligns to business transformation. Cloud isn't about technology, it's about doing business in a different way. That's the fundamental thing, is how am I going to do business in a different way? And we're pretty much, I say 10%, this is from stats that I found, right? We're pretty early in the game of building those cloud native applications. Cloud native data architectures, combining cloud and data, what the hell, We're absolutely at the beginning. And really, there's new architectures emerged in the last two years. One's called a data mesh, and if you haven't heard of data meshes, you will. I'll talk about that in a second, but think about new architects. So if some of you are architects in the room, think about architecturally, what are the modern principles around architecture that are emerging? which allow you to take advantage of the new emerging cloud native architectures, and how do I architect the applications for the future? And how do I build it so I can build a roadmap to migrate to these new architectures? Right, that's another thing. So, some of the key areas are around looking at internal champions. If you're talking to the CIO and the business and the business users, you want to convince them that this kind of stuff is useful. The challenge is CIOs and technologists can't translate very well into business speak and tell people, hey, microservices and cloud is really useful. So you have to you change the message on how you sell this. You've got to talk it from a business agility perspective. You have to talk about it from a business benefit perspective. So some of the companies that we're talking to, just one data company that comes to the top of my head. They're a data company. They sell data, right? And I was talking to the chief architect, and he says, what we do is provide an FTP site with an Excel sheet or a CSV file that customers can buy. Customers download. So, well, what do you mean? Like, yeah, we sell the data as an Excel sheet. What the hell? So driving that change is one of the important things. That champion, that business champion that has tech savvy, can understand some of these things, is a really big one. Driving adoption is an evolutionary thing. There's no big bang on this. You cannot do this in a big bang approach. For me, it's always using new methodologies like Agile. Agile is one that we use a lot, and I'm sure some of you do. For me, Agile is a really important method, and it's not about technology. It's not Agile in software engineering. This is Agile in how you build and deliver business change and solutions. It's not only about software engineering, software development. Moving away and changing your business model on how you spend money on your technology infrastructure, using a usage-based approach. Instead of buying CapEx and buying large amounts of hardware and software, it's a usage-based approach. Now, the CFO needs to understand how that's going to work, because they're not used to saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to pay a bunch of license fees up front and I'm going to pay yearly maintenance. That shift to having a usage-based model really affects the whole way IT works. And also, when you're talking about usage-based models, if you're not careful with cloud, you can spend a large amount of money before you know it. And I know this from experience. One of my data scientists built a model, and we didn't have restrictions on our AWS account, and he struck up a bill of like several $1,000s before I knew it. And I was like, what the hell are you doing? Jesus Christ, right? And data scientists don't think about how much a model costs to run. They say, oh, this is my model, I'm just going to execute it, and that's what they do. And before you know it, it can cost a lot. So, usage-based models are important, but that needs a whole set of new capability and understanding in the business to be able to take account of that change. So go in a bit more detail on what does cloud native mean? And there are sort of 4 broad themes around what cloud native is. I talked about microservices already, but the key here is to think about what are called loosely coupled. So you're building logically set up components which are loosely coupled, i.e. they're not reliant on each other. Now that's hard work to do, but hey, look, that's what architects are there for. That's what they do. Thinking about data components, similarly, how do you build those data components together that can be assembled to solve a particular problem? So for example, you have a customer domain. In that customer domain, you have a whole set of data. In that customer domain, you break that down into pieces, and as an architecture, underlying that will be all the systems that handle customer data, the CRM system, the ERP systems, the marketing systems, the HR systems, well, not HR obviously for customers, but you see what I mean, right? So thinking about data in a different way as part of this model. It's a whole discipline. Talking about serverless. So serverless architecture is where you don't actually provision a whole server that runs an application. You build those components run in the cloud, and those components, I mentioned Kubernetes before, they run as containers, and there's no actual server that you call. Yeah, and what you have is things like you build what's called data as a service, and you build those API endpoints that access the applications and the assembled application, if you like. I mentioned Agile earlier, but this is a really important thing around cloud native. If you're moving things to a cloud native model, what you want to do is be more agile. You want to shift the way they actually build and deliver applications and migrate them and assemble applications rather than build these monolithic applications themselves. And using agile as a really great way to do that. One of the biggest areas which has exploded is actually how do I manage my infrastructure? How do I actually manage all of that complexity? Because there's a whole new set of complexity that emerges if you move stuff to the cloud. If you're doing it properly, then DevOps is a humongous area that, to be honest, is understood, because it's not managed well in most companies, but also it's undermanaged, because people don't realize that actually there's a whole sort of new capability you need to build in your business that you never had before. This is where the challenge is around cloud native, right? It's not just sticking stuff in the cloud, it's like, oh, I have to run my infrastructure in a different way. I have to have a different set of people and capabilities in my teams to actually manage all of that stuff as well. One of the other emerging parts is what's called data ops. So data ops sits alongside DevOps, and if you're talking about how you take your data, a data scientist in your business goes from getting the data, labeling it, building the model, executing the model, deploying the model, managing the execution of that model. There's a whole set of elements around DevOps and data ops that need to sit there to handle that, and the data ops piece is slightly different, right? So if you think about running a model, okay, say I've got 1,000 models, how do I manage 1,000 models and where they are and how they're executed, which versions do I use? That's a huge amount of undertaking to make that happen. So these are elements around cloud native that you have to create. Without that, you won't make it successfully with a cloud native transformation. And I sort of mention AI, we hear about AI all the time. In the media, the media's awash with AI. The challenge is, until you can fix your data, you can't do AI, and you can't do it to scale. And the challenge is also, if you're going to build a new business, you need to think about how does AI fit into every business process? How do I build that architecture, that technology, that operating model around you be able to embed AI into everything? So the reality of AI and what the media says are so far apart today. Most companies probably have less than 5% doing AI. Now, we see lots of vendors adding in AI into their business. They say, we've got AI this and AI that. Look, it's a marketing thing. What can you do, right? Product marketing teams want to talk about AI because it's exactly what to do. When you go into a customer and they go, well, do you do AI? I go, yeah, I do AI, here it is. And the reality is BS, right? It's not AI, it isn't. But look, what can you do? You can't avoid it. It's a trend that's happened in the last 5 years. Everybody talks that we do AI. If you start digging, you realize actually that's not the case, right? It really isn't. But the thing to remember, going back to the cloud native thing and thinking about rebuilding applications, think about how these models, so I talked about models earlier, how do you build and deliver those models and the data around those models? You have to look at architecturally through a cloud native model and say, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to build and assemble these models? How am I going to build these new types of applications that leverage AI? So just as a sort of an example, there's hundreds, if not thousands of AI companies out there all saying, we can build and run your model. So take it in every division of a company, whether it's in finance or in HR or in operations or in marketing. All these AI companies are there saying, I've got these models, can I can run this model for you. The reality is, okay, well, I need the data to run that model on. Are you going to build silos for each AI company that comes and says, hey, I've got this model, I can run it in this, I can run this model for you. Companies aren't going to do that to scale. There's no way they're going to get 100 silos of AI companies all building or all executing models on their own silo. You have to think about the fact that, hey, I've got my data, it's my data, I want you to run your models on my data, and I want to control that. So the challenge is, how do you do that? Part of it is around shifting the way these vendors think around building these models. They've got to say, look, you give us the models and we'll run it on our infrastructure. And it goes back to the whole agility and flexibility and component-based stuff. You can say, hey, I can wrap that up into a microservice or set of microservices to execute those models. What that gives you is flexibility and agility, because what you can say is that model isn't working, I just replace it with another one without affecting any of the infrastructure that it sits on. And that's a really powerful way of using and scaling your business in this kind of model. One other example, I put a little stat here, which is quite interesting. So many companies have gone to do AI, but very few have actually seen the benefit, which is quite interesting, right? However much hype you see out there, the reality is so far away. 10 minutes. The reality is so far away that something has to change. And this is where I would say things like cloud native architectures and using data in this way is one of the ways that you can get that adoption faster. So, this is about aligning your business strategy with your digital strategy and your data, right? Fundamentally, as we've seen in the last 18 months around COVID, people have been forced to be digital, but companies are realizing, oh my God, Jesus, we're not that modern. We can't change that quickly. We need to be able to change faster. How do we do it? So the primary thing is align your business strategy and your data and digital strategy, and obviously your cloud, how you use cloud, all into one. So no longer is a business strategy about operating model. It is about operating model, but the way you actually run your business and the way you operate your data has to be taken into account in the ways, the characteristics I mentioned earlier about what cloud native is about. Driving business process change, moving away from monolithic process, I've got a typo there, sorry about that, to think about processes in the way that embeds microservices, embeds those kinds of architectures. So your business processes change and digitize, but actually think of it in a different way. So it's not just about business processes, it's about how do I change the way I run my business, and how does cloud help, and how do I use microservices and other approaches to deliver those business processes. I see companies go talk about digital transformation, and you go and really ask everybody, so okay, what do you mean by digital transformation? They don't know. They don't know what it is. They talk about it all the time. You go and say, okay, well, tell me what you mean by digital transformation. And vendors say, some technology consultants go, so your marketing consultants who build great websites, they say digital transformation is building a web app. Because for them, that's what it is, right? If you're an agency and you build web applications, for them, that's what it is. Digital transformation is building a web app. If you go and talk to a technology vendor, so yeah, you can have data processing in the cloud, then that's a digital transformation of your data. If you have, I can go on, right? You get the point. What I'm saying is digital transformation has nothing to do with technology. It really is fundamentally rethinking your business and the capabilities and the operating model and how you run your business if you want to be around in the next few years. And being able to adapt your business model, because at the end of the day, most companies are going to have to change their business model and how it runs today. They're going to have to change it. So data has got to be connected to business value. Having raw data sitting around is fantastic, and that's what a lot of companies have done. But it's saying how am I going to use that data to help my business transformation, to help my business model, to make more revenues, to be more efficient. There's a disconnect between the two. There's a real disconnect between the two. And I mentioned AI in the previous slide. Embedding AI into every part of your business is absolutely going to happen. Whether you like it or not, it's going to happen. Think about how that works. Think about how the models are going to work, how do I implement them, how do I integrate them into my business. So, the three big areas around the challenges for cloud native are these three things, right? How do you create the business case? How do you create the business case for this stuff? Is it really, it's actually not that hard if you try it, if you align it to your business challenges, business strategy. So I had a call, I was talking to somebody yesterday about, okay, what is your vision and your business strategy? Where are you going with your business? And if you understand that business strategy and you can tie that with how the technology capability in these new architectures and cloud can fit in, you've got a great business strategy. But trying to align those things together with non-technical people and business people is a hard thing to do. So part of this is about using different language, not using technology language with senior business execs and board level people. They just don't understand it. So finding the language that you can use that people can understand at a business level, which implements all the things we've been talking about, is a difficult thing to do, but it's doable. Things like building personalized experiences. So if you're a Facebook user, your Facebook page is completely different to my Facebook stream. No one person has the same Facebook link, Facebook pages. No one. Everybody has a different one. So that's just one example. I mentioned about the cloud complexities, right? Cloud is complex. It really is. You have to take that into account. and not underestimating the amount of work it will take, and not assuming that it's going to cost less. Everybody assumes moving to the cloud is going to cost less money. I don't think so. You've got to be aware that it's not going to cost less. Change is one of the hardest things, changing culture, changing operating model, changing, if you're going to be agile and you're going to transform, the speed of the delivery that you're going to do is fundamentally different. And that's sometimes very hard for organizations. You might, for example, you might do a release cycle every 6 months. If you're going to move from a release cycle every 6 months to every week or a day, that's a massive shift in culture and a massive shift in how you're going to run your business. So change is a really hard thing to do. And obviously, it needs a bunch of training and skills development, deployment, and that's a lot of work. That's a lot of communication and retraining. And again, if you want to move your business to this new model, you have to do it. You have to do it. So I'm going to run out of time, but I was hinting about data meshes, and I mentioned data meshes earlier. I won't go and talk about it. Just type data mesh on the web, and you'll find it. But fundamentally, all the things I've talked about building up, this is what data meshes are. You're talking about different domains of data, and you're bringing those domains together. It's a fundamentally different way of thinking about how you bring your data together, and the implementation of it is using cloud and cloud-native principles. So I talked about this earlier. I'm not going to talk about it again. Well, I will. There's no AI without data. It's as simple as that. Right? If you haven't fixed your data, forget trying to do AI. So, how do you start? Where do you start? Bring your data together. Logically integrate your data. This is not about building another data lake. This is about logically bringing your data together. And data meshes and architecture principles around that are exactly around how to do that. Apply AI to your data and understand how to do that. Think about it that way. And any vendors that come in and say, I've got this great model, and they want to build their own silo, say, no. I don't want you to build your silo. You're going to work on our data in our way, and you need to fit into our architecture. And then think about building applications with data. So there's a principle called, there's a sort of 3-layer model called the systems of record, the systems of intelligence, and the systems of engagement. So what we're talking about here is really around the systems of intelligence, which then surface data-driven applications. So going back to when you're migrating your software to you're migrating to the cloud, think about building applications not from a client-server perspective, but actually data and application. And the data comes from anywhere, right? It doesn't matter where the data comes from. The software engineers don't need to know where the data comes from. They're building the application. Underneath, there's a complex infrastructure, obviously in the cloud. And that's how you build and deliver that. So, 3 last points. Integrate your data, AI, and your cloud strategy together. But the primary thing is a business strategy. That's how you do it. Your business strategy is going to be driven by cloud and data. It's going to happen. If you're not doing it that way, then you're frankly missing the boat. You've got to think of it that way. And definitely use new modern architectures, and data meshes are one of those architectures, and rebuild and build your applications as cloud products. That's it. Thank you very much. I don't know if I have questions or not, but I'm here so you can ask me questions afterwards. Thank you very much. Thank you.